This video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations. A man crawls through the dirt. In pitch darkness, he shuffles backwards, dragging armfuls of sand with him. It's hot, humid, and horrible down there. He regrets ever going in. After an eternity, he can feel his feet pressing against the entrance. He twists around, shoveling more dirt around his feet, and slowly aches to a standing position. Everything seems to shake around him. The crashing and banging rattle down into his bones. He stops, considering that maybe he'll never get out of here. Trying to escape was futile. Desperation takes him for a moment, and he sinks to his knees, the silt still lying in messy piles around his feet. He composes himself, bags up the sand, and climbs upward through a small man-width passage before arriving in a small wooden box. This is the story of the most daring and dangerous prison break ever recorded, and the ingenious 3 men who managed to pull it off with nothing but a wooden vaulting horse. This video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online PvP strategy game where you can choose to lead a real country in modern global conflict with up to 128 other players. Research a variety of contemporary vehicles and weapons to use against your enemies in games that can last up to weeks. Make alliances with your neighbors, or conquer them in an epic battle to rule the world. Much like the story of the wooden horse escape we're about to tell, victory isn't just about raw power, but guile and strategy. Conflict of Nations is also cross-platform, so you can start a game on your PC and continue playing on your smartphone or tablet anywhere on the go. It feels super cool to team up with your friends and plan tactics for long-term strategies. Brew fans who sign up through clicking our link in the description will get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription completely free. This offer is only available for 30 days, so be quick and get a leg up in the future war for supremacy. Stalag Luft III was a prison camp near the town of Junkie in Poland, operated by the German Air Force to house prisoners of war from different Allied countries, including Great Britain, France, Canada, and the United States. It was composed of 4 compounds, each surrounded by 2 10-foot high barbed wire fences that sat 5 feet apart. In between them, the Germans laid rows of concertina wire, which is a type of barbed wire that can be stretched out like an accordion. About 25 feet inside the perimeter ran a warning wire that if you were caught past, they'd shoot you dead on the spot. The German guards, called goons by the prisoners, would sit on top of towers along the fence, able to fire down at the POWs with sniper rifles and machine guns if they spotted any funny business. Of the many escape attempts from Stalag Luft III, the Great Escape, immortalized on film in 1963, was the most famous, but the tale of the Trojan horse was the clear second, mostly because it was the only plan that really worked. The tale began 2 years after Vancouver-born RAF airman Oliver Philpot was imprisoned in the freshly built Stalag Luft III in April 1942. Oliver, Ollie to his friends, had seen every manner of escape plot fail miserably, all of them ending in the cooler, which basically meant 10 days in solitary confinement. In just the summer of 1942, the goons found between 60 to 70 tunnels snaking their way around the camp, though none managed to break free of the barbed wire as of yet. Despite their failures, the prisoners, nicknamed Kriegies, could not be stopped. This is when Ollie was approached by 2 men, Mike and Bill. They asked him about a breakout he witnessed when he was taken to an interim camp while Stalag Luft III was being expanded. It was a type of escape they called moling. It was a process where men would quickly bury themselves in the dirt and tunnel, mole-like, in a tiny pocket of air toward freedom. Mike and Bill had an idea. They contemplated how ancient warriors moved from place to place in secret. That was when Mike, a purveyor of the Greek classics, remembered the great Trojan horse that the Greeks used to destroy the city of Troy. Instead of using a horse to sneak men into a fortress, they would just reverse the process. They would use a horse to sneak men out of a fortress. Ollie, ever the skeptic, replied with sarcasm, but Mike had a plan. No, this is where we alter the classics a bit. We mean a hollow wooden vaulting horse. It was a daring plan. To dig a tunnel right under the noses of their captors had perks, but they could be caught at any time. Not only were the goons constantly watching them, their schedules were regimented to make sure they had the least amount of time to plan. And even if they could start digging, the Germans had planted seismographs along the outer fences they could use to listen in on any potential digging. Mike and Bill thought it was worth it. They would be able to start their tunnel much closer to the perimeter fence than others that had to begin inside buildings. This would make their tunnel considerably shorter than other attempts, so they wouldn't have to dig as long, and hopefully be out before anyone knew something was up. Or rather, down. They built a wooden vaulting horse out of bed frames and other scavenged wood, then started a regular workout routine around the horse before they started digging. They didn't need permission from the goons, but ferrets, camp slang for guards with dogs, would poke their noses into any changes to the prisoners' schedules. So some innocent vaulting was paramount to avoid suspicion. On July 8th, 1944, Mike and Bill began their operation. 2 posts were inserted into either end of the vaulting horse for carrying, and just inside, holding their feet as high as possible to make sure no guards saw toes sticking out of the bottom, hung Mike and Bill. Their first priority was to begin a vertical shaft using wooden red cross boxes to hold back the dirt and to balance a cover on top of when they were done. Mike became the main digger. Bill managed gymnastics classes above ground for appearances, and Ollie, not yet an official member of the escape, helped by sitting in a nearby hut watching for ferrets. Kriegies in the camp were often asked to help with escape plans they wouldn't get to use. Some refused, but most considered any escape a resounding success, even if they themselves couldn't get out. Whenever digging was done, Mike would cover up the hole, clamber into the horse, hang bags of sand on small hooks inside the horse, and get carried off. Everything would be taken to the canteen where it was tipped over, and Mike, completely naked, he never did any digging with clothes on, would roll out the bottom and run to clean himself up. The main problem they had was logistical. Where were they going to put all the dirt? The ferrets would immediately notice the wet sand from deep underground against the dry silt the camp was built on. Their first idea was swiftly discovered, so they had to be more careful now. The goons knew there was a tunnel somewhere, and if they weren't careful, the whole scheme could blow up in their faces and get everyone dumped into the cooler. Ollie managed to come up with a plan to pass sand through the rafters in the canteen to get rid of it. It was exhausting work, climbing up into the roof and hauling bags of sand, but back in those days, everything was exhausting. They had another problem now. Digging and moving dirt was getting similarly exhausting. Typically, tunneling operations like that had relays of diggers working on shifts, but with just Mike and Bill, progress was slow. So, because of the help he'd given them, Mike and Bill asked Ollie if he wanted to help them dig and guarantee himself a spot in their escape. Ollie agreed, and was soon carried in the horse to the spot to start his share of the digging. Though fully clothed, he wasn't interested in Mike's nude method. He cleared the sand, pried up the boards, and was greeted by a familiar stench. It was a stale, earthy stink mixed with the scent of old sweat, baking under the earth. Looking back, he said that his dreams didn't yet include smells. Yet, when they did, this one would surely be a nightmare. Ollie crawled down the 40-foot shaft, which was barely wide enough to let him crawl along his belly. In pitch darkness, it felt like an eternity before he found the end of the tunnel. But once he found it, he knew his job had only just begun. He dug for a while until enough sand accumulated around him that it made a seal around his neck. Within the claustrophobic nightmare space, he had to shuffle 40 feet backward on his belly, shoveling dirt along with him in complete darkness. Inside, he began to panic. As he crawled along the tunnel, he thought, I would tell Bill it was all a mistake. I could never go up this again. But back in he did go, and the escape continued. By this time, Ollie knew that escaping wasn't just about getting past the fences. It was about getting to neutral territory, and you could do that one of two ways, by foot or by train. Both methods were difficult in different ways. By foot, the main difficulty was living off the land and avoiding patrols. By train, the difficulty was maintaining a forged identity that could hold up to scrutiny. Ollie, after watching countless other Kriegies hauled back into the camp after making madcap dashes through the Silesian forest just to be thrown into solitary, thought the latter more viable. When it comes to escaping, getting outside the fences was just the first step. Usually, what would make or break an escape was clothing and identification papers. In fact, the details were the most important. Ollie remarked in his book that even the difference between British and German shoelaces could be the difference between escape and capture. Stalag Luft III had many amenities, including a company of forgers and a tailor. Any artists were quickly hired into the employ of the forgers to fake all kinds of official documents. Similarly, the Kriegies also kept a stockpile of civilian clothes and German uniforms they nicknamed goonskins to help any would-be escaper fit in a little better on their way back to England. With a company of forgers at his beck and call, Ollie just needed to decide on an identity. It would live and die by his language skills. So that ruled out German, Italian, and French, since a single conversation could blow his cover. His nationality would have to be somewhere neutral, a country that Germany would allow into the continent, but foreign enough that he wouldn't likely run into someone from there. He settled on being Norwegian. Ollie needed some more info to build his alias, so he approached a Norwegian Kriegie for help. He strolled up and said in his typical RAF British accent, "Haldo, you wouldn't know it, but I'm a Norwegian." To which Haldo replied that he, indeed, wouldn't know it. Continuing, Ollie asked, "Where shall I be born? Somewhere a bit remote, I feel." Haldo, getting in on the grift, answered, "What you mean is, if a German talks to you, you don't want him to have been there. Hammerfest should do." The two men went on to lay out Ollie's entire identity. He would be a Norwegian Quisling, which was slang for fascist collaborators in Norway, derived from the last name of the Norwegian head of the state at the time, Vidkun Quisling. Ollie would be in Germany as a businessman, scouting factories for a margarine company. But there was one final problem they needed to solve. Haldo stopped for a moment and turned to Ollie. "We have forgotten the most important thing. Who are you?" Ollie thought for a moment and settled on something easy, John Smith. Though Haldo pointed out that that didn't sound very, Norwegian. So, Oliver Philpot's new identity became something just as common, but much less British, John Jorgensen. Then, one day in October, Mike, Bill, and Ollie hit the perimeter fence. Not at the angle they wanted, mind you, since it turned out their tunnel had started off 30 degrees askew in the first place. But that turned into a blessing in disguise when the goons discovered a different tunnel plot. The guards brought in a small group of Russian POWs the Germans used for forced labor to dig up some dirt and fill in the discovered tunnel. Unfortunately, the place the goons wanted to take the dirt from was exactly on top of the wooden horse tunnel. In went their spades, and up came the sandy, silty dirt, and Ollie could do nothing but watch as near 5 months of work was about to unravel in front of him. The goon barked more orders at them, commanding them to bury some trash into the tiny hole they'd made. Looking on, a POW named Desmond turned to Ollie and said, "I think they dug that hole just about where your tunnel would have been if it had gone straight." Ollie declared triumphantly, "Build your tunnel cockeyed, 30 degrees off true, for real safety." With the perimeter fence breached, the day for escape had come. The trio began their final preparations to leave on October 29, 1943. They gathered civilian clothes and put the final dates of their identity papers. There was another thing Ollie knew he would need: a way to tell time in a pitch-black tunnel. He knew his friend Jimmy had a watch, so he sauntered over, saying, "Hey, Jimmy, you know that, Rolex?" And before Ollie could finish his sentence, Jimmy was slipping it off his wrist and handing it over. "Don't get a rifle bullet through it. I wouldn't do it for anyone but you." By the way, that watch cost him about $2,000, accounting for inflation. So let's all be a little more like Jimmy, eh? With their final prep done, the three men realized that someone would need to seal them into the tunnel after they left. The horse could only fit 3 people, so they would need a 4th man to seal up the tunnel behind them. The solution they landed on was to leave Mike buried under the ground for a day before the escape, and bring Ollie and Bill in later with a 4th man who could rebury them. So the trio buried Mike down in the tunnel and waited for the evening prisoner count, tricking the goons into counting another man twice, concealing Mike's disappearance, and as soon as it was done, clambered into the vaulting horse one last time. Down in the tunnel, Mike waited for Ollie and Bill. Once inside, they pushed their supplies along by hooking the straps to their feet while sliding along the tunnel. Halfway through, Ollie thought that the earthwork was now no longer enemy, but friend. After what felt like hours, Ollie checked Jimmy's Rolex. It was coming up on 6:30 p.m. A guard would be passing above them. Minutes later, Mike finally broke ground and poked his head out like a little groundhog. It was time. He and Bill intended to escape together, but Ollie thought 2 men traveling together was too suspicious, so he decided to go it alone. Mike and Bill looked back into the tunnel, exchanged looks, and vanished over the top. Ollie followed shortly after. Searchlights swung across the clearing. As one passed, Ollie broke across the clearing toward the tree line. He looked back and saw the camp for the first time as a free man. He was free, and they were not. Ollie found a hidden spot and changed into his civilian clothes, making sure to dust off any telltale dirt that would look out of place. He made his way to the train station, fingering the Reichsmarks in his pocket to pay for his ticket. This would be the most dangerous part. If anything was out of the ordinary back at camp, this station would be the first place the goons would check. While standing in line, Ollie tried to be as natural as possible. Looking around, he noticed a small Frenchman standing in front of him. It was Mike! Wait, no, sorry, it was Michel Conde. Ollie knew that striking up a conversation with them was far too risky, and as the train station started filling up with civilians and off-duty officers, the Kriegies couldn't take any chances. After an age, the train finally arrived, and while looking back out towards Stalag Luft III, Ollie took his first step towards real freedom. In the following days, Ollie traveled along the rail lines to Frankfurt, then Kustrin, and finally on to Danzig, a city on the north coast of Germany. Dodging patrols, Ollie scouted the docks to see if he could find a ship heading toward neutral territory. After 2 days of trying to look as casual as possible, he managed to slip his way onto a Swedish tanker. He was found out by an engineer shortly before they were set to depart, who brought him to the captain of the ship. He was told that he had to leave. Ollie was able to offer them up to £500 on behalf of the British Air Service to bring escaped men home, but still they refused. "It is not worth my while to be hanged by the Gestapo for £500, the captain said. He was terrified that they would turn him over to the Gestapo, so he scattered, hiding in the coal chute, but to no avail. If anyone peered down in there, he would be spotted instantly, even if he buried himself in coal. Before he could lose all hope, a young Swede returned and beckoned him. Ollie emerged from the coal, and the Swede took him to the lowest parts of the ship, making use of the back service corridors to make sure no one saw them. The 2 men arrived at the boiler, and the Swede swiftly undid the nuts on a large boiler plate before gesturing into the hole and making a big show of breathing. Ollie got the message. He could hide in there, and he would still be able to breathe. It was good enough. Hiding inside, Ollie curled up close to the outer hull of the ship, listened to the sounds of the engines slowly spinning up, and spent his last few minutes as a fugitive and stowaway thinking of Britain, his family, and all of the Kriegies back in Stalag Luft III. Once the ship was out of German waters, the young Swede returned to Ollie and brought him to the captain. "You still here?" was all that was asked of him, and he was soon led to a sink to wash the coal dust off himself and given some food. When Ollie disembarked in Stockholm on the 4th of November, he went straight to the British office and signed in. He'd been on the run for a week, having emerged from the tunnel outside the camp on the 29th of October. The British legate gave him new clothes and a place to stay, but just a couple weeks later, he was called back down. When he arrived, he saw two men standing in the lobby. They turned to him with a start. It was Mike and Bill, glad to be reunited with friends and have others to corroborate his horse story, which the British legate's office barely believed. Ollie finally settled down to wait out the end of the war. He prepared his things to return to England and picked up a phone, making the first call to his wife and 2 children after 2 years living as a prisoner in the camp, nestled in the Polish wilderness. Conflict of Nations is a free online PvP strategy game set in our modern world. Develop your own strategy and fight in grand battles across the globe. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days. Click the link in the description and fight your way to victory.